The night was suffocating, each breath a struggle. Amelia's feet pounded the cold gravel, sharp stones digging into her bare skin. The shadows of her pursuers loomed behind her, their whispers of promises turned threats. Every crack in the dark seemed alive, like the earth itself was conspiring against her. Her heart raced, the rhythmic pounding deafening in her ears. The sound of chanting, distant yet unyielding, bled through the air, a twisted hymn that sent icy tendrils down her spine. There was no hope of outrunning them. The cult's grip had already sunk too deep. The door, now firmly locked behind her, represented more than a physical barrier. It was the final seal to her prison. The world outside seemed distant, unreachable, yet her desperation pushed her forward. One wrong move, and they would claim her forever. A memory flickered, her sister's voice pleading with her to stay. But there was no turning back. Amelia pressed on, her every step a defiant scream against the darkness. Amelia stood at the threshold of the compound, heart pounding in her chest. The air felt heavier here, thick with something unspoken, something sinister. She had come seeking answers, a family, a purpose, something she could hold on to. What she found instead was a prison, and the chains had already begun to tighten. The leader, charismatic and warm, had embraced her with open arms, offering solace where her broken heart had cried for it. But now, as the nights grew longer and the rituals darker, Amelia could feel the cold grip of control seeping into every corner of her mind. She had been blind, caught in the illusion of belonging. What she hadn't realized until it was too late was that this place would strip her of everything: her will, her freedom, her very identity. The whispers had started, soft at first, but growing louder with each passing day. "Stay," they seemed to say. "You're safe here. You'll never be alone again." But was safety really worth the price of losing herself? The first ritual was nothing like Amelia had imagined. At first it had seemed like a gathering of hopeful souls, all seeking solace in a shared belief. The leader, with his serene smile, had guided them through the motions. The chanting had felt strange, like a rhythm she couldn't quite understand, yet her body had responded to it, moving in ways she couldn't control. She had wanted to leave, but had found herself caught in the mesmerizing pull of the group. The people around her, all so serene, so accepting, had looked at her with kindness, but Amelia had started to see the cracks. There was something about the way they spoke, the way their eyes gleamed with certainty. Something wasn't right. The leader's words were soothing, but there was a dark undercurrent she couldn't ignore. As the night wore on, the room grew colder, and the chanting became more intense. Amelia's pulse quickened, and she felt as though the walls were closing in, trapping her in a web of lies she couldn't escape. The rituals grew more frequent, and with each passing night, Amelia felt herself being drawn deeper into the fold. The rules were simple: unquestioning obedience, devotion to the leader, and the acceptance of the group's teachings. The punishment for defiance was swift and brutal, though never spoken of directly. It was a look in the leader's eyes, a subtle gesture from the enforcer, that made it clear. The cult's iron grip tightened on her every thought, every action. Her body moved in sync with the others, her once independent mind slowly yielding to the collective will. Each day blurred into the next, until Amelia could hardly remember what life had been like before the compound, before the rituals. She had stopped questioning, stopped resisting. There was no room for doubt, not if she wanted to survive. And yet, every night, as she lay in her small, dim room, the walls seemed to close in just a little tighter, the sound of chanting ringing in her ears, a reminder of how far she had fallen. Amelia's thoughts raced as she stood in the middle of the darkened hall. The doors were locked, the windows barred. She was trapped. The once welcoming faces around her now seemed hollow, eyes glazed with blind faith. The enforcer, a cold and imposing figure, stood silently at the far end of the room, watching for any sign of rebellion. His presence was enough to keep the others in line, to silence any thoughts of escape. Amelia had seen it before, the punishments, the way the enforcer's cold eyes would flick over a member who dared to question, who dared to step out of line. The consequences were swift, unyielding. She had begun to see how the leader had masterfully manipulated everyone, controlling their every move, bending them to his will. But the rebellion inside her grew stronger, fed by whispers of escape, of freedom. Still, the cost of defying the leader was unknown, and Amelia was terrified of what would happen if she crossed the line. Amelia had been here for weeks now, and each day the compound's grip seemed to tighten around her. At first, she had believed the leader's words. They were soothing, promising, and filled with warmth. But the reality of life here was far different. The cold rituals, the chanting, the strange devotion of the followers, it was all becoming too much. And yet, she couldn't leave. Not yet. Not when the cult had begun to feel like a strange form of family, something she had longed for after losing everything. The leader had spoken of community, of unity, of a higher purpose, and for a while, Amelia had believed it. She had wanted to believe it. The promise of belonging had filled the emptiness inside her, the ache that had followed her for years. But now, as she watched the others, their eyes vacant, their movements robotic, the truth was impossible to ignore. This wasn't salvation. This was submission. Amelia had become just another cog in the wheel, and the thought of it made her sick. The walls that had seemed like protection were now suffocating her. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to reclaim her life before it was too late. One afternoon, the leader gathered everyone in the central hall for a meeting. His voice was like honey, warm and smooth, and it drew them all in. He spoke of love, of peace, of salvation. The words were beautiful, and for a moment Amelia almost believed him again. But as he spoke, something about his gaze sent a chill through her. It was calculating, not kind. It was a look that made her feel small, insignificant. She had seen this look before in others who had joined the cult with her. It was the look of someone who had lost themselves completely, surrendered their identity to something greater. The leader's power didn't come from his words. It came from his ability to manipulate, to break people down until they no longer knew who they were. The more he spoke, the more the air in the room felt thick, suffocating. Amelia's hands clenched into fists as she listened, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a community. It was a trap. She had to escape. But as she looked around at the others, all of them absorbed in his every word, Amelia realized something. No one here was going to help her. She was alone in this. Days passed, and Amelia's internal struggle grew. She could feel herself slipping further into the cult's grip, but the fear of leaving kept her rooted in place. What would happen if she tried to escape? Would they hunt her down, drag her back, and punish her? The enforcer, a silent figure, always lingering in the background, seemed to embody the threat. His gaze was unyielding, his movements precise, as though he were always watching, always waiting for someone to break. Amelia had heard the whispers. The ones who had tried to leave before had never returned. No one spoke openly about it, but the rumors were enough to make her hesitate. And yet, there was a flicker of defiance in her heart that wouldn't die. She was a person, not a puppet. She had a right to live for herself, to make her own choices. But how? The cult's influence was insidious. Every day, they took more and more from her. Her voice, her choices, her autonomy. The leader's words kept echoing in her mind, a constant reminder that she was nothing without the group, nothing without him. But deep down, Amelia knew the truth. She couldn't stay. She had to escape. But the price of rebellion was steep, and she wasn't sure she was ready to pay it. One night, Amelia found herself in the leader's private quarters. He had summoned her there, his voice smooth and reassuring. "You are special," he told her. "You have a role to play in this world, a destiny greater than you can imagine." The words should have comforted her, but instead, they made her feel like a cog in a machine she couldn't escape. The leader's charm was undeniable, but it was also a weapon. He had a way of making you feel seen, of making you believe that you were the most important person in the room. And yet, the moment you questioned him, the moment you hesitated, that warmth would turn cold. His smile would fade, replaced by a look of quiet menace. Amelia had seen it before. The others who had dared to defy him were never the same again. They were broken, stripped of their will, turned into empty shells of their former selves. She shuddered as she stood before him, the weight of his gaze pressing down on her. His words lingered in the air like a spell, making it harder to think clearly, to see the truth. For a moment, she almost believed him. Almost. The next day, Amelia woke with the taste of the leader's words still lingering in her mind. She had tried to shake them off, but the more she thought about it, the more they seemed to make sense. Maybe this was the life she had been searching for, a place where she finally belonged. But then the voices in her head grew louder, reminding her of the cost. How long could she keep pretending? How long could she ignore the truth of what was happening around her? She watched as the others went through the motions of their daily routines, their faces numb, their movements mechanical. The cult had swallowed them whole, and there was no trace of the people they used to be. Amelia had come to the compound searching for a family, but what she had found was a prison. The walls were closing in, and no matter how hard she fought it, she was beginning to feel trapped. The leader's promises of salvation were nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion, and the more she saw it, the more she wanted to run. But fear held her in place. Escape wasn't just about running away. It was about facing the unknown. The hall echoed with silence, as Amelia felt the tension crawling over her skin. The enforcer stepped forward, his heavy boots striking the floor with measured force. A young man was dragged to the center, trembling, his head bowed in fear. The enforcer's gaze was cold, unyielding, a blade without compassion. Amelia's breath caught when his hand struck, the sound sharp and final. No cries followed, only silence, as though the group had forgotten how to react. The leader stood in the corner, his calm smile masking approval. Amelia felt nausea twist in her stomach. This wasn't order. It was terror dressed as faith. She wanted to scream, to stop it, but her voice died in her throat. Around her, others kept their eyes fixed on the floor, their expressions drained of emotion. The cult thrived on fear, shaping loyalty from violence. Amelia realized then that silence was survival. She clenched her hands, her nails digging into her palms, as the walls seemed to press tighter around her. Meals were no comfort in the compound. Amelia sat at the long wooden table, forcing herself to copy the rhythm of the others. They chanted between bites, voices low, their faces lifeless. Every motion was mechanical, as though rehearsed endlessly. Amelia's stomach twisted with each spoonful. She wanted to believe she wasn't alone in her doubts, but the eyes of the enforcer loomed from across the hall. His stare never wavered, watching, measuring, waiting. Amelia dared a glance at the woman beside her. A flicker of something passed in her eyes, fear, perhaps doubt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Amelia clenched the edge of the table, the wood digging into her palms. If she spoke, if she broke the silence, she would be dragged to the floor just as the young man had been. She swallowed hard, her voice trapped, her thoughts suffocated. The meal was nothing but another ritual, another rehearsal in obedience. The leader summoned Amelia to the center of the hall, his voice smooth and commanding. "Confess," he said gently, his words both soothing and suffocating. Amelia's throat tightened. Every eye turned toward her, the weight of the silence pressing down. She fought to breathe, to think. What could she say? If she lied, would he see through her? If she told the truth, would she be broken? The leader's smile remained calm, but his eyes gleamed with quiet menace. "Confession purifies the soul," he repeated. Amelia forced words past her trembling lips, claiming her only fear was failing him. The group erupted in chanting, voices blending in chilling harmony. The leader nodded slowly, his expression one of approval. But Amelia knew the truth. He had seen her hesitation. His calm demeanor masked something cruel. Her body shook as she stepped back, the chant still echoing in her ears, drilling into her mind like chains. The courtyard felt colder than usual, even under the fading sun. Amelia walked slowly, her robe brushing against the dirt. She spotted Sarah sweeping nearby, her younger sister's eyes flicking up briefly. Amelia's chest tightened. For a moment, she thought she saw doubt there, a shared spark of rebellion. But as the leader's shadow crossed the courtyard, Sarah's eyes hardened, suspicion replacing hope. Amelia felt the sting of betrayal. The cult had twisted love into suspicion, family into spies. Every bond was breaking, replaced by obedience. Amelia lowered her gaze and kept walking, her hands gripping the fabric of her robe to steady herself. She was alone, utterly alone, in a place that had promised family. The silence of the courtyard pressed against her ears, broken only by the soft rustle of sweeping and the distant chants from another room. Trust was gone. Fear had taken its place. Amelia swallowed hard, her resolve building quietly. That night, Amelia was stopped by a loyal disciple in the corridor. His eyes burned with fanaticism, his voice sharp. "You hesitate," he said, pointing an accusing finger. "Your heart is not one with us." Amelia's breath caught, her pulse racing. She tried to answer calmly, insisting she was faithful, but his expression told her he did not believe her. His suspicion was a warning. Every step, every glance, every thought was being measured. Amelia's chest tightened as she realized she was not just trapped by walls, but by eyes everywhere. The disciple's voice lingered in her ears long after he walked away. "One step out of line, and you will answer for it." The words cut into her, heavy and sharp, echoing until she lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling. The compound was no longer only a prison, it was a machine designed to break her. And she knew the breaking point was coming. Amelia's heart froze when she heard her sister Sarah's voice. It was not the whisper of comfort she longed for, but the cold blade of betrayal. Sarah spoke loudly to the leader, her words heavy with conviction. She accused Amelia of harboring doubt, of resisting the faith that bound them. Amelia's world shattered in that instant. She had clung to Sarah as her last hope, believing some bond of family remained unbroken. Now she saw the truth. Sarah's loyalty was not to her blood, but to the cult. The leader smiled softly, nodding as if Sarah's betrayal were an offering. Amelia felt the eyes of the group on her, burning into her skin, judging her. The enforcer shifted closer, his shadow swallowing her trembling frame. Amelia wanted to scream, to reach for Sarah, but her throat locked tight. Trust was gone. Family had become another weapon in the leader's arsenal. The betrayal cut deeper than any punishment. The night deepened as Amelia stumbled into the archives chamber, summoned there by the leader's command. Shelves of old books lined the walls, their pages brittle, their words twisted to serve the cult's story. As she ran her fingers across the worn covers, she found something that made her blood run cold. The leader's origins were not divine, nor chosen. They were soaked in greed, manipulation, and violence. He had been nothing more than a man hungry for power, weaving lies until they became chains. Amelia's breath caught, her pulse thundering in her ears. The truth was here, hidden yet plain. He had rewritten history, bending lives to his will. She felt her stomach churn as she realized the depth of the deception. The chants, the rituals, the punishments, all part of a masterful performance to break them. Every word he spoke had been another brick in their cage. The faith was false. The savior was nothing more than a fraud. Later that evening, Amelia was approached by Daniel, one of the few who seemed restless within the compound. His eyes darted nervously as he leaned close, whispering words she thought she'd never hear. "There's a way out," Daniel said, his voice trembling with both fear and defiance. Amelia's chest tightened, her breath shallow. Could she trust him? The compound had taught her that every smile could hide betrayal. Yet Daniel's eyes, though haunted, carried a spark of truth. He spoke of tunnels beneath the compound, of others who had tried and failed. The cost was always death, but freedom still existed for those who dared. Amelia felt her heart race as hope flickered. Could she risk it? Could she follow him? Or was this another trap, a test designed by the leader to break her? She clenched her hands, torn between fear and the desperate hunger for freedom. Daniel's whisper lingered, "You don't have to die here." The following day, Amelia was summoned again. The leader demanded her loyalty be proven in the most brutal way. He ordered her to condemn another member, a trembling boy whose only crime was failing to recite the chants correctly. Amelia's body shook as the boy's eyes locked onto hers, pleading silently. She could not betray him, yet silence meant she herself would suffer. The leader's calm smile masked cruelty, and the enforcer's heavy steps drew nearer. Amelia's mind screamed, her soul torn between self-preservation and mercy. The cult thrived on breaking bonds, turning compassion into weakness. Her lips trembled as she spoke, her voice shaking. She begged for the boy's forgiveness with her eyes, even as the words of condemnation left her mouth. The hall erupted in chants, and the boy was dragged away. Amelia collapsed inwardly, her chest aching with guilt. The cult had forced her to sacrifice a piece of her soul. That night, Amelia learned the final truth. Escape was not freedom. Those who had tried before had been hunted, dragged back, and displayed as warnings. Their bodies were broken, their spirits shattered, paraded before the faithful to strengthen the cult's grip. Amelia's heart pounded as the whispers reached her. Tunnels were watched, paths were sealed, and the world outside was not safe. The leader had ensured fear would follow them even beyond the walls. Amelia lay awake in her cell, the chants echoing through the compound. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her ears, but the voices bled through. Freedom meant death, loyalty meant betrayal, and silence meant survival. She realized then the true horror. There was no safe choice. The cult had not only trapped their bodies, but had enslaved their minds. Even if she escaped, she might never truly be free. The chanting grew louder, rising like a storm that would never end. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by Amelia's pounding heartbeat. She had made her decision. Tonight she would run. The risk of staying outweighed the terror of escape. Each step toward the gate felt like walking through fire, every breath shallow and sharp. Her robe clung to her skin with sweat as the cold air bit at her trembling body. She replayed Daniel's whispered words in her mind, the memory of tunnels hidden beneath the compound. Her stomach twisted with fear, but her legs kept moving. A flicker of torchlight behind her made her freeze. She pressed against the wall, praying the shadows would protect her. Voices murmured nearby, their cadence slow, deliberate, almost like the chanting that had haunted her nights. Amelia's hand tightened into a fist. She had no weapons, no plan beyond survival. But the fire inside her, the desperate need for freedom, burned brighter than fear. Tonight would decide everything. The moment Amelia slipped through the courtyard, the alarm shattered the silence. A roar of voices erupted, shouts mixing with the dreaded chant. The enforcer's footsteps thundered behind her, heavy and relentless. Amelia's lungs burned as she sprinted across the open ground, her bare feet tearing against the gravel. Her vision blurred with panic, but she forced herself forward. Torches lit up the night as the cult poured into the courtyard, their cries echoing like a war song. Daniel shouted, urging her toward the hidden passage. She stumbled, her knees scraping against the ground, but she pushed herself back up. The sound of pursuit was deafening. Amelia's chest felt as if it might collapse, her heart pounding like a drum of war. Survival had never felt so close, and yet so impossible. The darkness was both her enemy and her shield. She could not stop now. If she stopped, she would be lost forever. They reached the passage just as the enforcer's voice bellowed, commanding their capture. Amelia turned, her chest heaving as the leader emerged from the shadows. His calm presence cut through the chaos like a blade. "Come back, Amelia," he said softly, his voice dripping with false warmth. "This is your home. Out there is only death." Amelia's body trembled, caught between the promise of freedom and the weight of his command. The world seemed to narrow to his eyes, sharp and unyielding, daring her to defy him. Daniel urged her forward, but Amelia's feet froze. For a fleeting second she almost believed him again, almost surrendered to his poisoned comfort. Then she remembered the broken bodies, the lifeless eyes, the silence of those who had failed. Rage surged through her chest, burning away the last threads of his hold. "No," Amelia whispered, her voice breaking. She turned her back on him and stepped into the darkness. The cult's fury erupted when Amelia refused. Another member, a young woman, was dragged into the hall and punished before the group, her cries echoing off the walls. Amelia watched in horror, her body rigid, as the enforcer carried out the sentence with brutal precision. The leader stood nearby, serene, his eyes never leaving Amelia. She realized this was not just punishment for the woman, it was a warning to her. The chants grew louder, drowning out the cries, their rhythm cold and mechanical. Amelia's fists shook, her nails digging into her palms. She could feel her breaking point pressing closer, like a storm swelling inside her chest. The cult would never stop until she surrendered or died. Watching the suffering unfold, Amelia made her choice. She would not surrender. She would risk everything to fight, even if it cost her life. Better to die fighting than to live as their prisoner. The moment came swiftly. Amelia broke free from the circle, her body fueled by adrenaline and terror. The cult's chants roared behind her as she sprinted into the night, the enforcer's footsteps pounding close behind. Her lungs screamed, her body aching, but she refused to stop. Branches tore at her skin as she plunged into the forest, the ground uneven and sharp beneath her bare feet. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound a threat. The leader's voice echoed in her mind, calm and cold, warning her of death beyond the walls. But Amelia no longer cared. The night was freedom, even if it killed her. Her body was weak, but her spirit burned with defiance. She stumbled forward, each step carrying her closer to the unknown. The cult was behind her, but their chains still clung to her heart. She whispered a promise to herself as she ran. She would never return. She would never belong to them again. The forest was silent, except for Amelia's ragged breathing as dawn crept over the horizon. She collapsed against a tree, her chest heaving, her body trembling with exhaustion. For the first time in years, no chant filled her ears, no shadow loomed over her shoulder. The stillness felt unreal, a fragile dream she feared would shatter with the next step. Her feet bled, her robe torn, her face streaked with sweat and dirt, but she was alive. She lifted her head toward the pale light breaking through the trees and felt tears sting her eyes. She had escaped, though every nerve in her body told her the cult's grip had not ended. Their chains were not only walls, but memories, voices that whispered in the corners of her mind. The freedom she had fought for was real, but it was laced with the haunting weight of scars that would never heal. She closed her eyes, clinging to the fragile promise that survival meant something more than pain. Days passed, and Amelia found herself in a small town beyond the forest. People looked at her with curiosity and pity as she stumbled into their world. She spoke little, her voice broken from years of chanting and silence. A kind woman offered her food, yet Amelia flinched when touched, her body still reacting as if punishment would follow kindness. She lay in a borrowed bed that night, the warmth of blankets around her, yet the sound of whispers filled her mind. Sleep was no refuge. Each time she closed her eyes, the chanting rose again, echoing inside her skull like a curse. Her body was free, but her mind remained a prisoner. She sat upright in the night, gripping her knees, tears streaming down her cheeks. Freedom had come at a price she had not expected, the realization that she might never feel whole again. She longed for silence, yet silence always carried echoes. Amelia tried to reconnect with life beyond the compound, but the world felt foreign. She walked through the town square, watching children play, their laughter sharp against her ears. It was joy she no longer understood. When neighbors spoke to her, their words felt distant, muffled, like echoes from another world. She smiled faintly, trying to appear normal, but inside she felt hollow. She had thought freedom meant belonging again, but instead she felt like an outsider in her own skin. The cult had stolen more than years. It had taken her sense of self. Amelia's hands shook as she bought bread from a vendor, the simple exchange overwhelming. She remembered how every gesture in the compound had been dictated, every word rehearsed. Now, choice felt terrifying. She wanted to belong, but she could not find herself in the reflection of those around her. She was both free and lost. Weeks later, Amelia returned to the edge of the compound, unable to resist the pull of what she had left behind. The walls loomed, silent and still, but she knew the darkness within them lived on. Her heart ached as she thought of Sarah. She had escaped, but her sister remained a prisoner. Amelia pressed her hand against the rough stone, her breath catching as memories surged. The chants, the punishments, the betrayal. Tears burned her eyes, but she did not step closer. She knew crossing the threshold meant death. Yet leaving meant carrying the weight of loss forever. Her body trembled, caught between love and survival. She whispered Sarah's name, her voice breaking in the wind. She could not save her, not now. The cult had already claimed her. The ache in her chest felt unbearable as she turned away, her footsteps slow and heavy with grief. Amelia began piecing together fragments of truth about the cult, gathering whispers from those who had escaped or had lost loved ones to its grasp. She learned of its reach, its manipulation, and the way it thrived on silence. Each fact twisted the knife deeper, but also fueled her determination. She wanted the world to know what lived behind those walls. At night, she sat with a notebook, her trembling hands scrawling every memory she could recall, every ritual, every word, every face. The chanting still echoed in her mind, threatening to drown her in fear, but she forced herself to write. Each page was a weapon against the shadows. Yet, even as the ink stained the paper, Amelia knew the cult's presence lingered within her. Freedom was not peace. The scars would remain forever. But she refused to let the cult's silence win. She would turn her pain into truth. Amelia sat in the small house, heart pounding. Footsteps pressed against the silence, shadows creeping under the door. The low murmur of chanting seeped through the cracks, growing louder with each second. She whispered, "I'm free," but the fear said otherwise. In town, Amelia discovered the cult's reach extended far beyond its walls. Whispers followed her, eyes lingered too long, and symbols appeared hidden in plain sight. Safety was an illusion. The world outside was not freedom, but another cage. Alone at night, Amelia pressed her hands to her temples. The chanting rose inside her skull, louder than thought, drowning her in memory. She whispered, "I'm free," but the echo mocked her. The cult was gone in body but alive in her mind. Amelia woke gasping from a dream of the leader. His voice lingered, calm and venomous. "You are mine." She stumbled to the window, but the wind outside carried faint whispers. Even in freedom, his shadow clung to her like a ghost. In the silence of night, Amelia curled on the floor, trembling. She whispered, "I still hear them chanting in my dreams." Tears blurred her vision. Freedom was real, but peace was not. The cult had left her body, but not her soul.